Well, so this is just a relatively quick video to touch upon something that's come out in the news the past week regarding Nicola Thinlips and the Rainbow Unicorn Parliament, workplace parking levies. So this article on the screen here, will you have to pay at work? So essentially, what this boils down to is a scheme which will allow individual councils to decide whether to impose an annual tax on car parking spaces that are provided by employers. Now, of course, the proverbial cop-out from the SNP, it's a very clever little ruse. A phrase that Scott's Armour quite often uses on his Telegram channel is, if in doubt, deflect your way out. And it's something that the SNP have become rather clever at, rather good at, I should say. They constantly will, if they can't deflect or redirect blame, pin the blame on Westminster for whatever it may be, they will just deflect, and they quite often use the councils as their shield in that respect. Lifting the cap on council tax rises, and they take a step back and they say that, well, it's up to councils whether or not they decide to raise taxes or not. The same party that promised all those years ago that they would scrap council tax, of course. They do something relatively similar when it comes to education in many respects. Whether it's the constant arguments regarding ventilation in school classrooms or just the abject failures of districts and their schools and their education. They'll constantly deflect blame and claim that it's up to local authorities. And they're doing the exact same thing when it comes to this scheme, the workplace parking levy, by deflecting the blame and saying that it's not up to them, it's up to councils whether or not they decide to take this forward. But the point is, though, that the scheme is coming on the back, it's predicated on the back of claims, which I'll play in a second from Thinlips in Parliament, that we need to encourage people to come out of cars. It kind of ties into the video that I made several days ago regarding all of these publications and whatnot that are coming out, route maps to get people out of cars. Now, all the namby-pamby bullshit that's clustered all around the plethora of pages in all of these PDFs and whatnot is all about behavioural change and incentivising, etc. But when you come to the end of said PDFs, etc., you come to find that in the end it's all going to culminate in raising taxes, essentially making it too expensive for people to be able to drive. And this is what they're trying to do in this respect. If you're giving councils the authority, the ability to implement a scheme which would essentially mean that people would have to pay to park at work, but you're doing so under the precursor that this is a means to tackle so-called man-made climate change, it stands to reason that a lot of these councils will indeed go through with this scheme. Stands to fucking reason. Vast majority of councils are in tandem, working in lockstep all across Scotland. Don't be fooled. Just because it's local authority, local government as they're classified as, they're no different. They're absolutely the same. I love the way the Edinburgh Council is going about this. They're essentially saying that they're not going to implement it until after the council elections. I wonder why that is. I wonder why. It says down here that the introduction of workplace parking levies is included in Edinburgh Council's 2030 city plan, and council leader Adam McVeigh said it's something currently being explored, adding that he's spoken to councils in England who have implemented the policy successfully and used it to fund additional mass transit investments. Furthermore, Deputy Leader Cami Day has backed the scheme being put in place in the capital despite Labour dropping support at a national level. There are no plans to progress the workplace parking levy business case this side of the election, and timelines for further consideration will need to be agreed with the new administration. Okay. The scheme, of course, essentially, as it says here, has been rolled out in certain parts of England already. That means that it's okay to then implement it here. The SNP love to brag how they're doing things differently. Well, clearly fucking not if you're just going to copy and paste what England has begun to implement. Nonetheless, it goes on to say here that drivers who want to park at work would have to pay an annual fee that could amount to hundreds if the cost is not covered by the employer. So naturally, some employers will pass the buck on to their employees. Nonetheless, as it says in every article, and it comes from the thin-lipped capuchin monkey's mouth herself, that it's argued that it will encourage more people to cycle, walk and use public transportation to get to work whilst reducing pollution and congestion on the roads. So naturally, as I said, if you've got a bunch of councils, local government authorities that are all working in lockstep all buy into the mantra of man-made climate crises, or a man-made climate crisis, I should say, stands to reason that they will go ahead and implement something such as this. Why wouldn't they? They're all about going green. You know, the BBC article saying something similar, that the government environmental groups believe the initiative will help reduce congestion and air pollution by encouraging motorists to walk, cycle or take public transport to work, as well as raising money for local services. But opponents say it will simply hit businesses and workers in the pocket at a time when they are attempting to recover from the financial impact of the pandemic, and they are skeptical about whether people really will choose to ditch their cars. Stands to reason that a lot of people probably won't, so that they will be fleeced financially. But as I said earlier on in this video, one of the angles, one of the latter stages of their long-term route maps to reduce car travel and essentially eradicate it completely later on down the line, is to make it financially impossible, a financial burden for people, forcing them to come off the road. So for the meantime, it comes across as incentivization for many, trying to get people to come off the road willingly. But in time, it will be forceful, you know? And you're already seeing this right now as they justify implementing a scheme such as this by saying that it's about trying to get people off the road. You know? And on top of that, of course, there's no upper charge limit, as this little brief video says here.
Minister, I can't see anything in the regulations or the Parent Act that sets a limit on what councils can charge for a licence. Can you help me there?
It is, of course, for local authorities to take a view on the limit that will be reached in terms of whatever they want to set the fee or the charge at, rather.
I'm quite astonished by that. So the Minister and her official have just confirmed that there is no limit whatsoever on what councils can charge for a licence. No limit whatsoever. So that will frighten the life out of businesses across Scotland.
Jenny O'Rourke, of course, from the SNP, the woman that was just in that video, dismissed the concerns displayed by that guy, who I don't know the name of admittedly, as scaremongering, and assured MSPs and a Holyrood committee that councillors were best placed to make decisions. She said this is a matter for local authorities to decide upon. If I was to come and set a top limit on this, I would be accused of interfering with local democratic principles, as I said, or as Scott Sarmer says, I should say. You know, if in doubt, deflect. So you're just passing the buck on to local authorities. You know, you're giving them this ability. You're giving them the ability to be able to implement this if they so choose, but the caveat is that this comes on the back of needing to reduce car travel. You know, it's just ridiculous. It's the equivalent of me letting my dog off his leash, knowing full well that he has the capability, if he so chooses, to bite people. But if he bites somebody, it's not my fault. Oh, no. I should have kept him on the fucking lead. Yeah, same principle.
And while public transport services are being cut, her government has turned against drivers as well. She's abandoned plans to improve roads, and now she's bringing in the workplace parking tax, without any cap on the amount people will be forced to pay. When it was first proposed, organisations like the EIS, the Scottish Police Federation and the Unite Union warned about the costs falling on teachers, police officers, care staff and shift workers. All warnings completely ignored by Nicola Sturgeon and her government. Now this week, the Scottish Retail Consortium has said the workplace parking tax is a recipe for extra cost and complexity. And today, the AA are warning that workers are going to be hit with levies as much as £1,000. First Minister, when people are already on the brink, with bills increasing and the cost of living rising, why is your government in favour of a costly workplace parking tax at the same time?
Let me turn to the workplace parking levy and remind Douglas Ross this gives a discretionary power to local authorities. They don't have to use it if they don't want to, or if they...
But you still gave them the ability to, you know? It's such a fucking cop-out. This is what the SNP do, you know? I was looking through several videos that covered this already, probably doing it better justice than I can give it, admittedly. But the amount of people in the comments that are defending the SNP by repeating that exact statement that Thin Lips has just uttered there, that They don't have to implement it if they don't want to, and it's not the SNP implementing it, it's local authorities. They've just been given the ability to, you know? It's like, it's such a fucking cop-out. Because at the end of the day, they wouldn't be able to implement these schemes had they not been given the ability to do so by the government. And why did the government give them the ability to do so? Well, the first excuse that you hear is that this is about giving the councils more power, etc. But the reality of the matter is, it boils down to the fact that they want to reduce car travel. This has nothing to do with empowering local authorities. This has nothing to do with giving them more responsibility. It's about passing the buck, and it's all predicated on the back of the idea that we need to reduce car travel. As she says herself.
They don't think it fits their local circumstances. And of course, I would remind Douglas Ross, it was before he was leader of the Scottish Conservatives, I grant you, but in their last local government manifesto, the Tories said, and I quote, "We need to empower councils and give them a renewed sense of meaning and purpose." So we are giving...
Yes, such a cop-out. Yes, let's just empower councils, you know. As was brought up by Douglas Ross previous to this, said, you know, currently as things stand, we're about to head into what's being classified as an energy, a standard of living crisis, and the SNP just, you know, fuck it, just give them the ability to add on some additional cost to people's burden already as it stands. The excuse that she gave, or the backhander that she gave Douglas Ross in response to what he said to that, was just essentially that it's Westminster's fault. As I said at the beginning of the video, if they can't blame the councils, they'll just blame Westminster. And I'm not saying that it's not Westminster that are at fault in many respects for what's going on here. But they have some part to play. They all do. They're all puppets. It's all pantomime. But at the end of the fucking day, if you understand, or you have the ability to, if you have the ability to reduce or blockade any further strife in people's lives, and you do the polar opposite, you're just as equally to blame. You know, you're going to put financial burden, an additional financial burden on people commuting to and from work under the pretext that this is to reduce car travel because of man-made climate change. Fucking thin-lipped bitch.
Giving discretionary powers to local authorities, and what do we have? The Scottish Conservatives opposing it and moaning about it. The second point is, this is simply giving local authorities in Scotland a power that local authorities in England have had for a decade and more, which is allowed to local authorities in England by the Conservative government. Not for the first time, there is a deep hypocrisy at the heart of Douglas Ross's question. And lastly, presiding officer, here we are again, all parties across this chamber are rightly signed up to our climate change objectives,
all parties are rightly signed up to these climate change objectives.
Net zero ambition, and we need to get people out of cars. We need to get
people out of cars. So on the one hand, it's just about empowering local authorities, but at the same time, it's also, you know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink to local authorities. We need to get people out of cars. And it's also been bummed up by the prospect of, if they implement these schemes, it will bring in extra revenue. So it's a win-win.
To get people onto public transport, which is why public ownership of the railways is a good thing, which is why free bus travel for under 22s introduced by this SNP Green government is a good thing.
It's such a wonderful, marvellous thing. You know, the bullshit they're trying to make out of that. That increases young people's well-being, etc. But anyway, I'm not going to get bogged down in all that nonsense.
So we will not just set the targets, we'll take the action to help meet those targets, and we'll leave Douglas Ross and his colleagues whining as usual on the sidelines.
Stunning and brave, you thin-lipped sausage. Anyway, peace. I just wanted to touch upon that, you know. Later on.